I would highly recommend that you talk to your kids about how credit scores work
Yeah.
because the vast majority of people do not understand how a credit score works. And so they spend their whole life trying to get this number higher when really it has absolutely nothing to do with your actual financial health.
We all long to live a courageous life of significance. We all want to be the example to our children and do big things that change the world. However, at the end of the day, the bills are calling, and the busyness of life often keeps us from stepping boldly into our dream and passion. Join Angie Taylor, a 30-year veteran educator and co-founder of Valor Global Online and Valor Global Foundation, if you long to leave a legacy for your family and leave your mark on the world. This show is for you. This is the Way of Valor.
Hey, welcome to the Way of Valor. I am your host, Angie Taylor, and this week is part 2 of learning all about financial literacy and how to coach and train our kids on handling their money well. I am joined with Dr. Lance Villers. He's the Director of Education at Valor, as well as a financial literacy teacher for many, many years. So, Lance, thanks for staying with me for this conversation.
Sure.
It is imperative, and I'm very excited that you're here. Guys, if you are joining us this week, but you missed last week, I totally recommend you go back, start with last week, and then jump to this week because it is a continuation of a conversation that was already started. So, Lance,
Yeah.
we talked about the barriers, and I love your acronym FISH for the way we look at money. I thought that was so good. But now we're going to get really practical because I think it's really helpful for parents to get
Mhm.
really, here are the steps to
Yeah.
help your kids gain a financial IQ.
Well, yeah, thanks again for having me back. I would say, I try to break things down into 5 areas that we need to talk to kids about money. So there are basically 5 things that you can do with money. You can earn it. And so that becomes more of a career type conversation around with your kids about what do you want to do with your life, right? How do you want to do that? You can save it. And so when we talk to kids about saving money, we say, okay, saving money is anything that you might need less than 5 years. So if you have a big purchase you're saving for, if you have an emergency fund set up or things like that, then that's what your savings are for. Or kids can invest it. So they can invest their money, which is longer than 5 years timeline. And that would be retirement or something like that. And then the last thing that we talk to kids about is giving it. So you can earn it, you
Mhm.
can save it, you can invest it, you can spend it. And it's very important to talk to kids about the best way to spend their money. So budgeting, those kind of things, and then giving it. And the real reason that we do all of those other things well is so that we can give generously to where we want
Yeah,
to give money. Because again,
yeah,
if you have not done those other steps well, you aren't going to have what you need to have to give away. And so
yeah.
as Christians, we believe in tithing, we believe in offerings above and beyond our tithe and things like that. And those are impossible to do without actually following the other steps.
Well, and I just want to jump in here, Lance, and share just a very quick anecdotal story because I think it speaks. When my parents, us kids were little, my dad just shared this story with me. I'd never heard it before, but they were getting threats that their house was about to be repossessed, their car was not working and needed to be repaired, but they had no money whatsoever, and they were at church. And at this point, they were fairly new Christians, hadn't
Mhm.
ever started tithing or anything. At this point, my dad is praying about their
Mhm.
finances because there's so much stress over their finances, and they had no idea how they were going to pay all their bills.
Yep.
And as he's looking in scripture, the whole principle of tithing comes up to him, and
Mhm.
he feels compelled to tithe in the midst of this moment
Yep.
where
Yep.
they're about to lose the house, where all of the things. And so my dad goes to my mom and says, we need to start tithing. And of course, this is in the midst of I'm about ready to lose
Yeah.
everything. And I
Yep.
have these three babies, and they decide they're going to take God at his word. They decide they're going to trust God at his word. And so they go ahead and start tithing. My dad was like, at that point, I thought, nothing's working.
Yeah.
Let's go after this. So they start tithing. He said within 3 months, their entire financial picture had changed. He ended up with new jobs, new
Yeah.
resources came into their home. And he said there's never been a day, and that would have
Yeah.
been over 50 years ago. There's been never been a day where he's considered since
Yeah.
that time that he wouldn't tithe it. But I think I want to go just a little bit further if
Yeah.
you'll let me here on this.
Yeah.
And the powerful thing is as a child growing up, that was a principle that was taught to me. I saw it practiced in our home. I never got money where that wasn't the first place that
Mhm.
the money got. Like that's
Yeah.
how I grew up. And now I run a multi-million dollar organization and foundation that gives millions of
Yeah.
dollars away globally
Yep.
because I learned from the age that I was young from my parents
Yep.
that when you are faithful to God, you can trust
Hmm.
God in
Yeah.
your finances. And
That's a
so
great story.
I want
Yeah.
to start there because I think that's something we don't understand, the passing of baton
Yeah.
that has to happen from you as adults. First, tithing starts with me, but then
Yep.
it translates into money. And you want to learn how to trust God, trust him with start with your money.
Yep.
Start with your money.
No.
So
Yep.
sorry.
No.
That's
No. 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 That's a great story. I I think it's one of the few places in the Bible that God actually challenges us.
yeah,
He's like, "I dare you,
yeah.
bring me your first fruits and see
Mhm.
what happens."
Yes.
And what you get back is going to be packed down, running over all of these things, right? It's also interesting, Angie, and as long as we're off script here, I'm going to go off script a little bit.
Let's go.
I
Let's
I
go.
know that there are people out there who have these stories about they get into financial difficulty in their life and then they go to the mailbox and there's $1,000 in their mailbox or
Yeah.
whatever, right? That has never been my experience. My experience has been like will especially when our kids were little, Gretchen was staying home with them and I was working and I was coaching and doing all this stuff. What always showed up was opportunities for me to work. And so
Yes.
somebody would say,
Me too.
hey, I need a deck built. Can you build a deck for
Mhm,
me or something like that? Right. And
mhm,
so
mhm.
I just think,
I think that's a valuable statement right there.
I know. And I know, I mean, you read George Mueller, he had the other experience I never have. So God's
Yeah.
like, I know you need money, but how hard are you willing to work for it? Because I'm
Yeah.
not just going to give it to you. So
Yeah.
anyway,
Yeah. That's so good.
that's a great story though. Yeah, I think I think having your kids watch you tithe is
Mhm,
incredibly important, and then talking to them about the importance of that. So,
mhm,
some really practical things that I wanted to talk about with kids. So, I would highly encourage parents to start having conversations with their kids about money from a young age, and if you haven't yet, start tomorrow,
mhm.
because I think that we talked about this last time. One of the reasons people struggle with money is because of how it happened in the family they grew up in.
Good.
And so, if you can start to normalize these conversations around money, there were times when our kids were basically in high school and junior high when I would actually print out our budget for the month and sit down with them and say, okay, here's what we make and here's where our money goes, so that
So
they have a
good.
better idea of what's going on, right? Because otherwise it's easy for a kid to go, well, I think my parents are making a lot of money, and why aren't they spending it on X, Y, and Z? And if you can just say,
Mhm,
now I
mhm.
wouldn't do that every month, but there were
Yeah.
several times when I just said, just so you guys know, this is what we spend our money on. Um,
hmm
and most of it involves them at that age.
Which, you know what I love about that, Lance, is first, it implies that you actually had a budget.
Yeah,
And I think that's probably one of the greatest discrepancies for most people is
yeah,
they they don't start with a budget. And
right.
then two, the ability then to talk through it because you also all of a sudden bring more accountability
Yeah,
in your finances when
yeah.
it is a discussion of here's our goals, here's where we're spending our money.
Yeah, and we operate off a budget. I started doing a budget years ago when Quicken had software on a little disk that you put in your
hmm
computer, right? Now we use a program called YNAB, YNAB. You need a budget. We do every month.
mm
And in our family, the way it works is I create the budget, do all that, and then Gretchen looks at it to see where we are. Um, that's just the balance we've
Yeah.
come to in ours. But
In our family, my husband just tells me, "Hey, stop spending right now." He's like,
uh,
"Hey, you've met the budget."
I think it's important too, though. Another practical thing is that you can to talk to your kids about things you've done well with money, but also
Yeah,
mistakes that you've made.
yeah,
Again, because
yeah.
one of our goals has to be to remove that shame and
Yes,
fear
good.
that is associated with money. And so if
Mhm.
I can tell my kids, look, these are good things I've done, but man, there was this thing I did here, and wow, it was a huge mistake.
Yeah, yeah,
That should help them um, as they're moving forward. I would say
that's good.
this: one of the things to start talking to your kids about at a very young age is the importance of staying out of debt. And I know that there are probably people listening who are going to disagree with that, but I think there are kinds of debt that is good debt. For example, we have a mortgage on our house.
Right.
We haven't progressed to the point where we can pay cash for a house yet, but that's our only debt. And
hmm
so I just think that okay, so let me tie this in with something else here. I would highly recommend that you talk to kids about how credit scores work
Yes.
because the vast majority of people do not understand how a credit score works, and so they spend their whole life trying to get this number higher when really it has absolutely nothing to do with your actual financial health. It's really
Right.
just this picture of how much debt do you have and how good are you at paying your debt off.
hmm
And
hmm
so, so someone can have no debt and a paid off home and
hmm
tons of money in the bank and have
Yeah.
a terrible credit score or a
Yeah.
zero credit score
Yeah.
compared
Yeah.
to somebody. And so I think those two things kind of go together is that I would highly recommend that the only things that I tell people it's okay to that I think are good debt are um, homes and sometimes education
hmm
because you can spend money and go into debt for an education that is worthless, or you
Yes.
can spend it on
There's a
and
lot
go
of
into
that.
debt for something that's good, right? So
hmm
some people ask me, what about going into debt to buy a business? I don't know enough about that. You could answer that better than I
Yeah.
can. Um,
Yeah, and I would here's what I would say to everything you're saying because I agree with a lot of what you're saying, but I would say there is like the people that disagree with you, they disagree with you because they have a much higher financial IQ and understand, so for example, investing in a business or investing
mhm,
in, but the vast majority of public and certainly not of our kids
yeah,
actually should follow 100%
yeah,
the
yeah,
and
yep,
learn financial IQ before, like you have no business investing in a business. And I say this as somebody who did it and learned the hard way. Yeah, investing in a business when you don't know how to read P&Ls and you don't
right,
understand the business aspect of it,
right,
of
yep,
the finances. The same it can be said, when we're talking about investing in property and real estate. Those are
yep,
great
yes,
investments to when you're investing in things that are producing income. There is good debt, but again, that all is a much like I want to make sure that everybody understands we're not talking to that crowd for this
Right.
podcast. That crowd, you don't need advice from Lance and I if you're
No.
living in
Yeah.
that space and you've figured out how to produce that level of income. We're talking to the crowd that statistically is 95 to 98% of Americans that are either vastly in debt to consumer debt, which that would be credit card debt,
Yeah.
or they're hardly making their bills. That's who we're
Yeah.
talking to.
Yeah. I'm not expecting Elon Musk to listen to this.
Exactly.
No, it's not for the financially sophisticated people, but you have to start somewhere. And so our
You do.
target audience is the parents who are how do they talk to their kids about money? And
Yep.
I did tell my kids, stay out of debt. Because
Yes.
I agree with you. My wife and I, we strictly use debit cards for I want to say 15 years until we had developed the financial habits and
And
self-discipline.
paying everything off. Yeah.
And then we got a credit card. And so we have a credit card now that we pay off every month. And we use the
Yeah.
miles to get airline tickets. Okay. But I would
100%.
never
Yeah.
recommend that someone start there until they've built that foundation.
Agree. Yeah.
Yeah.
You and I agree
Yep.
completely on that. Probably things that we do today are probably not practices I would ever recommend to somebody just
No.
starting out. Agreed.
No. And that like one of the things that Dave Ramsey recommends that didn't work for us was using cash. We tried
Mm-hmm.
that and it
Yeah.
just I felt like I was spending more when I had cash. So we just said that doesn't work for us. So we went on. Here's one that I think is super important, Angie. You have to tie work to money so that your kids understand that. So I'm not opposed to allowances. We gave our kids allowances and we would say,
Mm-hmm.
this is what you get just because you're a part of our family. But
Mm-hmm.
then there are these other things that you need to do for work if you want to earn money,
Yeah.
because I think it's a powerful tool. And all our
Yeah.
kids started working when we lived in Oregon. They all worked for farmers and they would do
Mm-hmm.
farm work in the summer where they were working 100 hours a week.
Yeah. Yeah.
But when you can have this conversation with your kids about, okay, I'm going to make up some numbers. You want that thing that costs $200
Yeah.
and you have this job where you're making $10 an hour. So
Yeah.
are you willing to spend 24, 25 hours because, taxes are going to get taken out of your life working so that you can
Mm-hmm.
get that thing?
Yeah.
That
Yeah.
changes your perspective on what you want to buy.
Yeah.
And so,
Well, I agree with you. And if I can just jump in here,
yeah,
we did that with our kids with missions trips, which is one of the things I love
yep,
about missions trips is we only let them do out of the 4 years, our kids went all 4 years of high school on a mission trip. And the first year they could ask for donations from our friends, but we never let them do more than the first year because we didn't want all of our friends to hate us for
mhm,
sending them letters every year, but also because we felt like it was what I think that people miss when you ask your kids to earn something. Obviously, you're teaching them discipline, delayed gratification, but you're also teaching them an abundant mindset of if I want something, if my family needs something, the money is out there, go get it.
yes,
And I
yeah,
think that the amount of people that are like, I can't afford something, that I want to look at them, because I hear this all the time with Christian education, that I want to look at them and say, what you mean to say is I choose
right,
to not afford something,
yeah,
because that's very much, there are so many high side hustles
hmm,
in this day and age. And I think there's something powerful for kids when they earn income and they get the reward of knowing I can earn it if I need it. So,
yeah. And the other valuable lesson they learn is, wow, I lose a lot of money in taxes, right?
uh,
I mean, isn't that the best when your kids come home with their first paycheck and they're like, oh, what? Like,
yeah.
yeah, uh-huh,
Yeah,
yep,
welcome to adulthood. Isn't it grand? I know
yeah,
I remember when I first discovered that you basically work until from January to, is it May or June? From January
June, I think,
till
yeah,
June before you actually start earning money
Yes.
from your paycheck. I was so depressed when I first learned that. I was like, that was the most depressing news in the
Yeah.
world of that is insane amount of taxes.
Yeah, no, I know. So I think that it's really important though for parents to not just write a check every time their kid wants something, but for their
Right.
but for kids to learn how to from a young age,
I
like
agree.
so that they can start to understand, and even then they can step into what you were talking about. Okay, so you earned this. Now what do you do with it? You need to
Yeah.
give part of it. You need to save part of it. You can go spend part of it, right?
Yeah.
Those are just the different things. I would say one of the things that you need to start talking to your kids about early on is the power of compound interest, where if they start
Good.
young, and even if it's putting a little bit away over the years, they will eventually wind up with a lot of money. They can build wealth because of the way compound interest works. And I think that's overlooked a lot too in terms of that.
Yes, I definitely did not understand that young enough, and I really am sad
Neither
about
did
it.
I. No,
I'm
I
really
know.
sad about it. It's
I
like,
know.
ugh.
Well,
So yes, I'm very passionate that we teach our kids this.
and I show the kids in my personal finance class a spreadsheet. And so if you have one guy, let's say two people both start at age of 20, and one invests for 10 years and then stops, and the other one doesn't do it for 10 years and then starts, and then they but by the time they're 65, the guy who waited 10 years will never catch up with the guy who started for 10 years and then quit.
Yeah,
And
that's really
so
good.
just things like that. And then I would say one other thing that I would talk to my kids about is understanding their risk uh, tolerance and their personality in terms of money,
Mm,
because you have some
this is good.
people, you have some people, you are probably a risk taker in life
Absolutely.
because, yeah,
Mhm.
right. And so I'm not.
Yeah,
I don't enjoy risk. And so I think the way your kids view money will depend on whether they're a risk taker
it's
or not,
true. It's
and
true.
what level they're willing to do. And so I just think that if we have just these conversations with our kids, that's the most
Yeah,
practical
it's
thing I
good.
would tell parents. Talk to your kids about money.
Yeah.
Um, and then I wanted to end. I'm going to throw in a bonus here. I'm going to tell you my Villers 4 rules for finances. Okay.
Oh, the best.
So
Let's go.
okay, so, and I'm telling you that I have developed these over years of making mistakes. Okay, so behind every one of these, there's a mistake that I don't want to say out loud. But so rule number one to always remember is that no one cares about your money as much as you do. So
Mm,
everyone else, and I tell the kids in my class this, everyone else looks at your money as a way for them to make money off of you. And so you have to understand that this is my money and no one cares about it as much as I do, right? And
good.
so
Hmm.
that's there's an entire industry of scams out there, and not even
Mm,
scams all the time, but
hmm.
everyone who talks to you has a plan for taking some of your money. So you
That's
have to
good.
care.
Yeah.
Um, rule number two, never invest in something you don't understand, or never put your money into, and I hate to admit this, but I do not understand cryptocurrency. I
Hmm.
have listened to the podcasts, I have read the books, and I don't get it. So I don't have any money invested in it, which
Hmm.
means that
Hmm.
when Bitcoin goes to $1 million, I'm not going to become a millionaire.
You're out of the mix. Yeah.
I am, but I don't know. Do either of those resonate with you?
Yeah. Well, I would say this on the investment front. Um, I invest in surprising. I invest in things I don't understand. However, I don't invest money that I can't afford to lose.
Okay. Yeah.
Right? Like my
Right.
investments have never been a strategy of like it so like I have my own investments that Angie Taylor gets to do. They're apart from my head because as we've established, I'm the risk taker. I don't
Yeah.
like the idea of living in a shack and having to rebuild. It doesn't necessarily scare me to death. It probably should. But, whereas my husband is like, somebody needs to be the grown up in this relationship. However, I do invest in stocks and stuff that I have my own little thing
Oh yeah,
going over
yeah,
here and have actually surprisingly done well in a number of my investments, but not because I understand it. So my rule of thumb is don't ever invest money you can't afford
that's
to
a good one.
lose.
I like that. Yeah,
And don't make it your like this is not our retirement plan. This is like literally
right.
my my version of gambling. Which I'm also not condoning or promoting.
No. Well, which brings me to rule number 3. There's no such thing as get rich quick. Right. And
True,
so when it comes to your money, slow and steady always wins the race.
true.
And
So
so
true.
I have made that mistake, and I have seen other people. I I mean, I'm not much of a taker, so that's not a big one for me. But I think what happens though is you go back to what we were talking about. People feel like they're getting behind in their investing, so now I need to take a big risk. And
Hmm.
there's no such thing as get rich quick. Yes, you
Yeah,
might win the lottery, but the
yeah,
odds are significantly against
that's
you.
true.
Let's just say
Yeah,
you're not going to win the lottery.
yeah,
And then my
yeah.
last one, if it sounds too good to be true, it probably is.
Also
And
true.
so
That is
those
also
are
true.
those are just the four
Yeah,
things that I've developed over the years, just because of mistakes I've made. Um,
yeah.
yeah, so I mean that's pretty much it in terms of, I would say, if you're a parent, going back to what I said earlier, just spend time talking to your kids about what you do and your money,
Hmm.
and
Hmm.
reinforce early on that money is tied to work,
Yeah.
and by the way, that's a good thing to work. Um,
It's such a good that we find our significance in work.
yeah.
There's many millionaire billionaires that are the most depressed people on
Hmm.
the planet.
Yep.
I do think that that is something that is important to say because again, this was a mistake I made for a very long time was, well, if I only made $10,000 more, if I
Yeah.
only made
Yep.
$50,000 more, and at no point did we ever make an amount that we went, oh, we
No.
couldn't use more. Like that's the thing that is
Yep.
like learn to live off of the income
Yep.
you are bringing in
Yep.
because that there will always be this sense of just a little bit more, just a little bit more.
Yeah.
And I guarantee you, in that regard, if you live in that space, and you'll just fill it with more bills.
Yep.
You know,
I
that's
know.
when you
Yeah.
upgrade your car, that's when you upgrade your house rather than going, how about we learn to live on this?
Yeah. There have been times in my life where I've tried to out earn my stupidity, and it's
How'd that
it's
work for you?
it's not a great place to be. Let's be honest.
Yeah.
No, I just think, again, I mean, you could put that in a barrier to success, right? This
Hmm.
feeling that
Hmm.
we're never quite have enough money. And
Yeah.
like,
Yeah.
as your income goes up, your level of living goes up, and it
Yeah.
just never, I mean, I've known people who don't make much money, but have a lot. And I know people who make a lot of money and don't have
Yeah.
any.
Yeah.
So,
Yeah, I agree. And learning to be content because at the end of the day,
yeah.
it very much is, man, my husband and I are in a season in life where, personally, we're making less just because we've made personal choices
Hmm.
to, you know, leave corporate world, all of the things. And the reality is we've never been happier,
Yeah.
like we've never been more content
Yep.
because we've discovered this joy of simplicity in so many
Yeah.
ways.
It's almost like Paul said that when he said, godliness with contentment is great gain.
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
So,
So anyway, this is a great podcast, Lance. Thank
yeah,
you
thank
for
you.
joining
That
me.
was
I'm
fun.
excited
Thanks
to
for,
push this out.
yeah,
Yeah. I'm sure
thanks.
we'll come up with more to have you on. I enjoy having you on. And
Uh,
hey, guys, if you enjoyed this podcast and it was helpful for you, make sure to give it a review. A 5-star like always helps the algorithms. And literally, when we understand that this is one of the number one causes of divorce
Yeah.
for families, it's one of the number one reasons people say they can't step into ministry or they can't step into a calling that God has placed on their heart is over their resources, don't you think we should be talking about it? I hope
Yeah.
this was helpful for you. Have a blessed day.